The poolside chairs are empty, the lobbies echo with silence, and the neon signs that once promised luxury now flicker like a dying flame. Across America, resorts that once defined the dream of escape are collapsing, and it's no accident. For decades, places like Miami Beach, Palm Springs, Lake Tahoe, and Aspen weren't just destinations, they were cultural icons. They represented the promise that no matter where you came from or how much you earned, you could claim a piece of paradise for a week. Families saved all year for that summer trip, newlyweds celebrated honeymoons under the sun, and middle-class workers felt, if only briefly, like royalty. But today, that dream is unraveling. Hidden fees, skyrocketing prices, corporate takeovers, and fierce global competition have left many resorts bleeding guests, shuttering wings, or vanishing altogether. And behind this collapse lies a much darker truth. The fall of America's resorts isn't just about tourism, it's a warning sign about the economy, the culture, and the future of the middle class itself. So why has the American resort gone from playground to ghost town, and can these once beloved havens ever be revived? Stay with us because the answers reveal far more than the end of a vacation. They reveal the decline of an entire way of life. To understand why America's resorts are collapsing today, we first need to revisit their golden era, a time when these places weren't just vacation spots, but living symbols of the American dream. Beginning in the 1950s, fueled by post-war prosperity and the explosive growth of the middle-class resorts across the country, became sanctuaries of leisure. Miami Beach emerged as the crown jewel with its Art Deco hotels, glamorous poolside parties, and the allure of movie stars vacationing alongside ordinary families. Palm Springs, nestled in the California desert, became a magnet for Hollywood royalty and blue-collar workers alike, offering sun-drenched golf courses, endless cocktails, and a promise of escape from the grind. In the mountains, places like Lake Tahoe and Aspen defined winter luxury. Ski lodges weren't reserved only for the rich. Packages made them accessible to factory workers and school teachers who had never imagined gliding down snow-covered slopes. These resorts thrived because they catered to everyone. A traveling salesman from Ohio could book the same hotel room as a Wall Street banker and for a brief weekend feel equal. That accessibility was the magic. Resorts represented affordable luxury, a phrase that defined an entire era of American tourism. The culture of resort life was woven into milestones of American families. Honeymoons were spent in seaside suites. Summer vacations meant piling into the station wagon for a week in Florida, and company retreats filled entire resorts with laughter, camaraderie, and late-night music. For decades, these destinations weren't just places to stay, they were where memories were made. And because air travel was expensive in those years, most Americans traveled domestically. This created a captive audience for US resorts, allowing them to flourish as cornerstones of both economy and culture. It wasn't just leisure. Resorts became backdrops of history. Political leaders, celebrities, and business tycoons struck deals in private cabanas. Concerts, beauty pageants, and conventions were hosted in glittering ballrooms. Resorts embodied not just relaxation, but also prestige. They were playgrounds and stages rolled into one. Families who returned year after year felt a sense of belonging. A resort wasn't just a hotel, it was a tradition. By the 1970s and 1980s, this golden age reached its peak. Middle-class prosperity ensured that most households could afford at least one annual getaway. For many, a resort vacation wasn't a luxury, it was an expectation. Travel magazines and advertisements of the time painted idyllic scenes, children splashing in turquoise pools, smiling couples on sun lounges, and elegant dinners under chandeliers. America's resorts became dream factories, producing images that reassured people that the good life was within their reach. But embedded within this success was a fragile foundation. The very accessibility that fueled growth made these resorts vulnerable to change. They depended on the spending power of the middle class, and they thrived in an era before international competition and corporate greed reshaped the market. Resorts promised paradise at a price that average families could pay, but that model was always at risk of breaking. For now, in those decades, the resorts flourished. They were the castles of ordinary Americans, where anyone could walk through the doors and feel rich, even if only for a fleeting summer week. The golden age of American resorts could not last forever, because the habits of travelers and the world around them began to change in ways that no hotelier could have predicted. Starting in the late 1990s and accelerating in the 2000s, the rise of budget airlines and an explosion in international travel reshaped the vacation landscape. For decades, US families had looked to Florida, California, or Nevada for their annual escape. But suddenly, a week in Cancun, the Dominican Republic, or even Thailand could be cheaper and often came with better service. The all-inclusive resort model perfected abroad offered guests unlimited food, drinks, and entertainment for one flat price. In contrast, American resorts clung to the a la carte system, room rates on one line, food and amenities on another, and a long list of hidden charges. The comparison was brutal, and for many travelers, the choice was obvious. But this wasn't just about price. Younger generations of travelers began valuing experiences over tradition. Instead of returning to the same beach resort their parents had visited for decades, millennials and Gen Z flocked to adventure tourism, cultural immersion, and platforms like Airbnb, which promised something authentic. The resort, once a symbol of freedom, started to look predictable, outdated, even boring. Where baby boomers had seen status and comfort in checking into a big-name resort, younger travelers saw an overpriced relic of a bygone era. Then came the disaster that would accelerate the downfall: COVID-19. In 2020, resorts across America locked their doors, emptied their pools, and furloughed their staff. Some hoped to weather the storm, but many never reopened. The pandemic exposed just how fragile the resort industry had become. Chains with massive debt loads collapsed under the weight of zero revenue. Independent family-owned resorts, already struggling to compete with corporate giants, closed permanently. For months, iconic destinations looked like ghost towns with boarded-up windows and deserted parking lots. The pandemic also rewired traveler psychology. Health and safety suddenly mattered more than the fantasy of a crowded pool deck or buffet line. Guests wanted privacy, space, and flexibility, qualities that Airbnb rentals, boutique hotels, and overseas all-inclusive resorts could deliver far better than the traditional American resort model. Even as restrictions lifted, occupancy rates lagged far behind expectations. Tourists had discovered alternatives, and many never came back. Adding to the pressure was the labor crisis. Resorts that tried to reopen in 2021 and 2022 faced worker shortages, skyrocketing wages, and constant turnover. The very staff who had once been the smiling backbone of resort hospitality were burnt out or gone. Service levels plummeted, and guests complained of long waits, dirty rooms, and poor dining experiences. Once a resort's pride was its service, now it became a liability. On top of that, inflation hit hard. Food costs, utility bills, and maintenance expenses soared in the early 2020s, forcing resorts to raise prices even higher. For middle-class families already squeezed by rising rents, medical bills, and stagnant wages, the idea of spending thousands of dollars on a resort vacation was simply out of reach. Where once the resort had been the great equalizer, now it became an exclusive playground for the wealthy few. All of these shifts, international competition, generational preferences, the pandemic, and economic strain created a perfect storm. Resorts that had once boasted year-long waiting lists for reservations now struggled to fill rooms. Owners quietly closed sections of properties, pretending it was renovation, when in reality it was cost-cutting. Marketing campaigns promised the return of paradise, but the reality on the ground was empty lobbies and restaurants serving half-capacity dining rooms. The truth was undeniable. American resorts were no longer at the center of vacation culture. They were losing relevance, losing trust, and losing money. And while travelers were looking outward abroad or toward new models of leisure, the resorts themselves seemed paralyzed, stuck clinging to the past. This was no longer just a slump, it was the beginning of a collapse. If the pandemic and shifting travel habits pushed American resorts toward the edge, then unchecked corporate greed shoved them over the cliff. In the golden years, a resort sold you a room, meals, and the promise of relaxation. Today, that same room has become just the entry fee into a maze of hidden costs, surcharges, and manufactured inconveniences designed to drain every extra dollar from your pocket. It starts with the infamous resort fee, a nightly surcharge, often $30, $50, even $75 that's added to the bill whether you use the services or not. Officially, these fees cover things like Wi-Fi, pool towels, or gym access, but in reality, they are a way for resorts to advertise deceptively low room rates online, only to hit guests with hundreds of dollars in fees at checkout. Then come the parking charges. Resorts that once offered free lots or valet now demand $25, $50 per day just to leave your car. Add in cleaning fees, service charges on food and drinks, early check-in or late checkout penalties, and suddenly a two-night getaway costs double what was advertised. This nickel and diming isn't accidental. Over the last 2 decades, Wall Street private equity firms and investment groups have taken control of many American resorts. For them, these properties aren't sanctuaries of leisure, they're financial assets to be squeezed for quarterly profits. Executives with no background in hospitality look at spreadsheets, not guest satisfaction. Their mission is simple: extract maximum revenue per guest, even if that means destroying long-term loyalty. The results are devastating. Families who once drove to Florida for a week at the beach now face bills of $3,000 to $4,000 for what used to cost less than half that. Dining on site, once a highlight, now feels like extortion, with hamburgers priced at $25 and cocktails at $18. The very notion of affordable luxury has evaporated, replaced with a sense of being scammed. Guests leave feeling not refreshed but robbed. Corporate cost-cutting compounds the insult. To increase margins, many resorts have slashed staff, outsourced housekeeping, and reduced amenities. Daily room cleaning, gone. Complimentary breakfasts, vanished. Pools and spas that once opened early and closed late now run on shortened hours. Meanwhile, shareholders celebrate record profits. This is the dark irony. Even as occupancy rates fall, many corporate-owned resorts are technically profitable because they've shifted the burden onto the guests, who remain charging more for less. The damage goes deeper than the balance sheet. By chasing the wallets of the ultra-wealthy and alienating the middle-class, resorts have severed ties with the very customers who built their legacy. Once upon a time, an Ohio teacher, a Chicago factory worker, and a New York banker could all share the same lobby. Now resorts segregate experiences, penthouses for the elite, overpriced standard rooms for the desperate, and nothing left for ordinary families who can't keep up. The sense of community that made resorts magical has been dismantled in the pursuit of profit. This relentless focus on revenue has sparked public backlash. Online travel forums brim with angry reviews, detailing surprise fees, lack of service, and outrageous prices. Viral TikToks and YouTube videos expose the truth, with creators showing receipts that prove how a $200 per night getaway ballooned into a $700 nightmare. These stories spread faster than any marketing campaign can contain, fueling the perception that American resorts have become hostile to their own guests. Yet the corporations behind the scenes seem unmoved. To them, resorts aren't about loyalty or tradition, they're interchangeable revenue streams. If one property falters, it can be sold, repackaged, or replaced. For the communities that depend on tourism, however, this strategy is catastrophic. When a resort alienates its base, it doesn't just lose customers, it drags down local restaurants, shops, and workers who rely on those visitors. Corporate greed isn't just hollowing out the resorts, it's hollowing out entire towns. By the 2020s, this toxic cycle had become impossible to ignore. What was once a beacon of escape now feels like a trap. Guests no longer book with excitement, they book with suspicion, scanning the fine print and bracing for the sting of the final bill. The dream has been replaced by distrust. And in a business built on the promise of hospitality, that loss of trust may be the most fatal wound of all. Walk through certain corners of Florida or Nevada today, and you'll see scenes that feel like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Once bustling resorts, now standing in eerie silence, pools drained or filled with algae, restaurants shuttered, and long hallways lined with locked doors. These places, once alive with laughter, cocktails, and clinking glasses, now echo only with the hum of air conditioning units, or worse, nothing at all. This is the silent collapse resorts, fading not with dramatic headlines, but with slow, painful abandonment. Take Lake Tahoe, for example. Once a magnet for skiers, gamblers, and vacationing families, it now has hotels operating at half capacity with entire wings permanently closed. In Florida, countless beachfront resorts quietly sell off to developers who plan to bulldoze them into condos. In Las Vegas, off-strip resorts unable to compete with mega casinos, and their flashy shows are boarded up, their neon signs flickering until the power is finally cut. These sites are more than just bad business. They are cultural funerals for places that defined the American vacation for generations. Part of the problem is global competition. While American resorts nickel and dime guests with hidden fees, overseas destinations perfected the all-inclusive model. Resorts in Cancun, the Dominican Republic, or Bali welcome guests with unlimited meals, drinks, and activities under one clear price. Families know exactly what they'll pay, and they get more for their money. Compare that to a US resort where the advertised $200 room becomes a $400 bill after resort fees, parking, and dining. The contrast is stark, and guests vote with their wallets. Then there's the generational divide. Younger travelers don't crave the traditional resort experience the way their parents did. Millennials and Gen Z are chasing Airbnbs in the mountains, eco-lodges in Costa Rica, or unique stays that offer Instagram-worthy experiences. They want authenticity, culture, and adventure, not a cookie-cutter hotel buffet. To them, the American resort feels outdated, overpriced, and irrelevant. And without new generations to sustain demand, the business model withers. The collapse is not always visible from the outside. Many resorts attempt to disguise their decline by quietly closing sections, reducing staff, or shutting down amenities. A guest might book a stay, expecting a vibrant property, only to find empty dining rooms, a pool under maintenance, and a resort that feels hollow. These cutbacks create a vicious cycle. The fewer amenities available, the fewer guests return, and the spiral accelerates. For local communities, this decline is devastating. Resorts are not just buildings, they are economic engines. When a resort closes, hundreds of jobs vanish: housekeepers, bartenders, maintenance workers, lifeguards, entertainers. The nearby restaurants and shops that relied on tourist traffic suffer too. Entire towns that once thrived on seasonal resort visitors now find themselves struggling with unemployment, declining property values, and a fading sense of identity. Perhaps the saddest element of this decline is how it strips away the myth of the American vacation. For decades, the resort represented a dream that every family, no matter their income, could enjoy a piece of paradise. Now that dream is dying. Instead of a unifying cultural ritual, vacations are dividing lines: luxury for the wealthy, struggle, or nothing at all for everyone else. Across the country, abandoned resorts stand as monuments to this lost promise. Graffiti covers walls where families once posed for photos. Weeds crack through tennis courts where celebrities once played. Empty chairs line pools where children once laughed. These ruins whisper a haunting truth: the collapse is already here, and it is spreading quietly, invisibly across America's tourism landscape. The silent collapse is more dangerous than a sudden crash. Because it happens slowly, year by year, many don't notice until it's too late. By the time headlines declare a resort permanently closed, the damage has already been done. Communities have lost jobs, traditions have been broken, and the middle class has lost yet another piece of its cultural foundation. What was once a national pastime has become a ghost story. The collapse of America's resorts is not just a business story, It's a cultural and economic earthquake with consequences that ripple far beyond empty hotel rooms. For decades, resorts weren't just destinations, they were lifelines for entire communities. When they falter, the impact is felt everywhere. Consider the workers first. Resorts employ armies of staff, housekeepers, bartenders, chefs, concierges, maintenance crews, entertainers, and lifeguards. When a resort closes or slashes operations, hundreds of jobs vanish overnight. In places like Florida's coastal towns or Nevada's desert communities, where tourism is often the primary industry, these closures devastate families. The ripple effect is enormous. Local grocery stores, laundromats, restaurants, and taxi services all suffer when resort traffic dries up. Suddenly, it's not just one hotel that disappears, it's the economic heartbeat of an entire town. The middle class, too, feels the loss deeply. Resorts once symbolized a promise: work hard all year, and you can afford a week of rest, sunshine, and indulgence. That promise kept generations motivated and bound together. But as prices soared and accessibility collapsed, vacations shifted from a shared cultural ritual into a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Families who once drove to Lake Tahoe or flew to Miami Beach now either skip vacations altogether or settle for cheaper, less memorable alternatives. The result is a widening cultural gap. Some Americans still sip cocktails by infinity pools, while millions are priced out of the dream entirely. Culturally, the collapse chips away at a sense of national identity. Resorts weren't just places to sleep, they were stages for American stories. Honeymoons, anniversaries, family reunions, graduations, even business deals were tied to these spaces. Their decline leaves a void that Airbnb cabins or short-term rentals can't replace. The communal aspect, the feeling of being part of something larger than yourself, is slipping away. So the question is, can America's resorts be saved? The answer is complicated, but not impossible. Some innovators are already testing solutions. A handful of resorts are pivoting toward wellness tourism, offering yoga retreats, organic dining, and spa-centered escapes aimed at health-conscious travelers. Others are embracing sustainability marketing, eco-friendly stays with solar power, zero-waste kitchens, and partnerships with local farmers. These approaches resonate with younger generations who value experiences aligned with their values. Technology, too, may play a role. Smart resorts that streamline check-in, personalize itineraries, and use AI to anticipate guest needs could restore a sense of exclusivity and excitement. But technology alone can't solve the underlying issue: affordability. If resorts continue chasing only the top 1% of spenders, they will lose the cultural foundation that once made them indispensable. To survive, they must find ways to reconnect with the middle class, whether through flexible pricing, transparent costs, or family-friendly packages that don't feel like scams. Another potential path lies in government and local partnerships. Towns that rely on tourism have every incentive to keep resorts alive. Tax breaks, grants for renovation, or public-private initiatives could help struggling properties modernize without sacrificing jobs. Without intervention, more communities risk the fate of becoming ghost towns littered with abandoned hotels. Still, there's an uncomfortable truth: not every resort can or should be saved. The market has changed, and clinging to outdated models only delays the inevitable. Some properties will need to reinvent themselves entirely as residential complexes, convention centers, or cultural hubs. Others may fade permanently, their ruins serving as cautionary tales of what happens when greed outruns sustainability. Ultimately, saving America's resorts is not just about hospitality. It's about reimagining what the American vacation means in the 21st century. Will it remain a dream accessible to millions, or will it shrink into a luxury for the privileged few? The answer depends on whether resort owners, corporations, and communities are willing to prioritize people over profits. The collapse is not inevitable, but time is running out. Each season that passes with empty pools and shuttered restaurants makes recovery harder. The resorts that survive will be those that dare to change, to strip away hidden fees, to honor their guests, and to embrace a vision of hospitality that feels genuine again. Whether America has the will to make that shift will determine not just the fate of its resorts, but the legacy of its culture of leisure itself. The image of America's resorts, once filled with joy, laughter, and the hum of vacation life, has transformed into something haunting. Empty chairs by the pool, locked dining halls, and abandoned lobbies are no longer rare exceptions. They are becoming the new normal. What was once a symbol of hope, escape, and community has been hollowed out by greed, global competition, and a refusal to adapt. The truth is, Stark resorts didn't simply collapse because people stopped caring. They collapsed because the very institutions that ran them forgot who they were supposed to serve. In chasing short-term profits, corporations alienated the middle-class families who gave resorts their soul. In ignoring changing travel trends, they allowed international competitors and new models like Airbnb to take the lead. And in the wake of crises like COVID-19, they lacked the resilience to rebuild with integrity. This is more than the story of an industry, it's the story of a fading cultural ritual. Vacations once symbolized unity, the idea that everyone, no matter their background, could carve out a piece of paradise. Now that ideal is slipping away, leaving behind a landscape of broken promises. But the collapse of resorts doesn't have to be permanent. There is still room for reinvention, for transparency, and for a return to the spirit of hospitality. The question is whether America will seize that chance, or whether these empty halls will remain monuments to a dream that died. So when you see those flickering neon signs and silent pools, ask yourself, is this the end of the American vacation, or just the beginning of something new?